Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to the panel on investing in African critical minerals in a competitive environment. Jude, you can start us off with an overview of the current investment landscape for critical minerals in Africa. What factors are shaping investor interest, and what challenges are most pressing in today's market?
Thank you. I'm not sure why you picked on me first. But,
You've been here before.
Yeah. So a number of things are shaping investor interest in critical minerals, most of it external to those investors. They are all aware of the growing importance of critical minerals to industry, to respective national security, and to also the opportunity for a growth industry. So there are a number of companies across the globe, and especially in the U.S. where I am, who want to understand, hopefully, what we're going to disclose and discuss today, and that is, what is the process of expressing your interest in developing and or acquiring critical mineral commodities? Where is the financing for those types of projects? And what are the prospects for, that being a sustainable investment? I think that we're going to, in the process of our discussions today, we'll discuss some of the things that, for instance, my bank, Exim Bank, looks at in terms of how you can qualify for funding of Exim Bank resources, and I'm sure others will discuss that as well. But I can tell you that one of the drivers internationally of why a lot of people are becoming interested in critical minerals, including sovereigns, is just the incredible growth and importance that other countries are beginning to place on critical minerals. The U.S. government has a very, very straightforward and quite aggressive policy of creating partnerships so that we have both partners and access to commodities that are on this list of critical minerals. And so others hearing that and being aware of it are expressing some interest in getting involved in something that they think is going to be a growth industry and a demand industry. So those are some of the things that are driving, I think, investor interest in this.
Thank you. We've heard today that there's a lot of dominance in terms of China in South Africa. Has the U.S. aggression into coming into into Africa a recent strategy, or?
I think the strategy is not recent. And it's hard to sort of acknowledge that a part of this is competitive. But there is such a thing as a zero-sum game. There is a quantity of critical minerals. And so the fact that there are many other regions and some large countries that are focused on these resources means that the U.S. and other countries really must, place their stake into the markets to try and make sure that they get their fair share of some of these minerals.
Thank you. Moving on to Mamecha. As Africa looks to attract more investment, what policy frameworks and enabling environments are essential to support growth in critical minerals? What balance should be struck between foreign investment and local interests?
Thank you, Kiana, for that question. I think in the first instance, we need to ask ourselves, do we actually have these resources that everybody keeps talking about? And the answer is yes. We're the biggest when it comes to cobalt, in the top 5 when it comes to manganese. So how do we actually get the right capital that works for us on the continent, right? How I look at this always is the dollar that we are looking for is a dollar that can go anywhere else in the world. So what makes us special? The first thing I think is, let's talk about regulation. We need to have the right regulatory environment that enables investors to come in. So how does that happen? Number one, mining is a long-term game. It's not like private equity where you can come in for 3-5 years and you exit. So investors are taking a long-term view on the country that they're coming into. So they need to know and understand that it is stable and what are the rules of engagement. So that's the first step. And I think, some African countries have done really well. Others have done well and along the way lost their way, such as South Africa. I think we actually at some point, did not get, we're not getting as many investors as we used to because our regulation was not as clear. Then the second part is, will I make money off this investment, right? So one, we have to have the right resource. But secondly, is the infrastructure so that you can actually extract your resource out of the country? And if it's not there, can I build that infrastructure to support me getting the resource out of the country? And am I allowed to actually take the resource out of the country? Then once those two are done, can I bring in my money into the country and will I get it out? So that is really critical to also unpack. Once those three are covered, then it is more of how easy is it for me to actually start operating there. The ease of operation is such a big thing, and if there is red tape, if I cannot get the mining license, if it takes me 5 years to get the mining license, I'd rather go somewhere else where I can actually, get that licensing to happen. Now, those are I think if I was an investor, from outside looking in, those are some of the things I would look at. Now, on local partnerships, right? And this is something that I think us at Moshe Capital pride ourselves with when we actually work with mining houses and other stakeholders, be it government, etc. You have to find a middle ground that actually works for everyone. And everybody has to be slightly uncomfortable because not everybody, you can't get everything that you want on your tick box and the terms of engagement. So how do you do that? I think, taking care of communities and employees must be a hygiene factor. I don't think we should even be here and talk about that. I think we need to all know that, you have to take care of your communities within reason, and you have to take care of your employees. So finding that balance on what is important for the country versus what is important for the investor is really critical. On what is important for the country, I think these things must be outlined upfront so that there are no surprises. As mentioned, mining is a long-term investment, so you need to be sure that you actually understand how you're engaging and that your returns will be there in that period that you're invested.
Thank you. So definitely the need for stable and transparent frameworks, I think. Moving on to Shirley, with the increased emphasis on ESG, what challenges and opportunities do you see for African countries aiming to meet these standards? How are financial institutions like ABSA supporting sustainable investments?
Look, that's a very big subject matter, as we all know these days. But I think the answer is actually very simple. Capital will follow sustainability now going forward. And I think financial institutions, private equity investors, infrastructure funds, etc., will definitely go into projects where they see there's a concerted effort to do ESG properly. You've spoken about, for example, the S part, the social impact. I think that's going to be very important, that we do support communities around the area where we either mine or put up projects, etc. But I think the social aspect also goes a bit further. In other words, extraction of our ore in Africa is one thing, and we should start building, beneficiation or value chain activities within the boundaries of the country as well. And again, I don't think it becomes a requirement from a financial institution to do that, but there should be the ease of trying to facilitate that as well. Maybe it doesn't become 100% of beneficiation of the end product that happens within the boundaries of a country. Maybe, a certain percentage before it goes somewhere else to be beneficiated any further. So when we look at projects, we also now, as a financial institution, are trying to do not just your usual mining projects. Anyone can literally, and I say to Jude, anyone can finance gold and platinum because It's known, you know what you get per ounce, and you know you can hedge it and risk manage, etc. But I think it's time for financial institutions to do what is important for the just transition. We know that gas, for example, becomes a transition fuel. But if we are putting in money for renewable plants, where's the magnets for the wind turbines? Where's the steel for the solar? So for us, it's those input and financing of the input into the renewables that help with the transition. That's what financial institutions should start doing. And I know it can't all be hedged, you know, and there's not a price or an exchange for many of these products. But then we should take a view, where's it going? Where's the offtake going? And then that becomes a discussion, even if you can't risk manage the actual commodity price specifically. So we will support Africa because that's our backyard, and we will remain there. And it helps if the government policies, the regulations, and everything is clear. That just helps the financial institutions in that regard. But just to come back to the ESG, we cannot ignore that anymore. The environment must be protected as well, and ensuring that we bring the whole environmental aspect into consideration as well. But the just transition, as much as we think it can be ignored, it's going to be there. It's how we actually help, and it's not just by putting up renewables. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Shirley. Moving on to Martin. Given your global perspective with the World Bank, what trends do you see shaping the future of critical minerals, especially in emerging markets like those in Africa? How can African nations position themselves competitively in this global landscape, particularly with respect to sustainable practices and infrastructure development?
Okay, thanks for the question. Look, I think other panelists have said it, that a dollar can go anywhere. You know, in other words, mining is a globally competitive business, and investors are ultimately always balancing a portfolio of risk and reward. If things get riskier in Latin America, you get more investment in Africa. If things get more risky in Africa, you get more investment in Latin America. Now, Africa has about 33% of the known global reserves. But that's not the limit, because as we know, Africa is extremely poorly explored. There is a lot more there to discover, and we don't know what the true potential is yet. This rising demand for critical minerals, I think we will get into some of the geopolitics a little bit later, but it does create one of these opportunities. One of the trends that I see in many countries, and this has been as early as 2 years ago, is that these countries are receiving delegations from much more foreign missions. There is a lot more sovereign interest in the rare or special metals at many of these African countries. And it's actually quite difficult, I think, for many of these countries to react. They don't really know what to do. And even if there is a critical minerals strategy that identifies a vision, what I see is that the next level of that strategy isn't very well defined, or if it even exists in terms of tactically, what should you do? Look, one of the other trends I think that we see is, driven particularly by, let's say, well-known brands. I wouldn't say every company is interested in this, but a lot of them are interested in selling responsible products, and they're looking backwards into their value chains and making sure that every process, every input is sourced or produced as responsibly as profitable. Now, whether that means human rights issues, we've heard about cobalt red in the DRC, and it's very difficult for the DRC to shake that reputation at this point. Decarbonization is the other key trend. And with the carbon border market adjustment mechanisms, or CBAMs, carbon market adjustment mechanisms, the products of countries that don't have an equivalent carbon policy in place end up getting taxed at the destination or the consumer country. There's no repatriation of that tax to the producer country. It gets kept. So the EU's CBAM will collect revenues and not redistribute it to those countries that didn't have the tax in place. Now, the first prize, obviously, is to reduce your GHGs, become, carbon competitive and perhaps even a supplier of choice to the rest of the world. But where you can't do that, because it does take time to shift the global or the national energy mix, the second prize, unfortunately, is to tax that yourself to an equivalent level and try and redistribute it. Because otherwise, the ultimate effect is that the price that your producer will receive is going to be lower than someone else's, or than it was before. And so you've actually transferred a part of your subsoil resource wealth to a consumer country if you're not doing things yourself. I mean, I think that message needs to come out a little bit more, I think, to understand the impact of it and so that action can take place. I'll be brief, but the third trend we've been talking about quite a bit has been the desire for value addition. And I think for the first time in my career at the World Bank, I'm seeing a coalescing of support for this. African countries have wanted this forever. And we've always had this view, and everyone's had this view of laissez-faire economics. Specialize at what you're good at, collect the tax revenue, distribute, invest strategically, da-da-da. But this move towards industrial policy is a new trend. And it's happening for two reasons. One, because it's good for these producing countries to create these jobs, to gather that income, the foreign exchange. But two, I think there's this recognition, let's say among G7 Western countries, that they can't do this on their own. I mean, first prize for them is to secure all the minerals they need within their sovereign territory and have the whole value chains onshore. That's not going to happen, not anytime soon. The second prize is to have partnerships with like-minded friends, I think is the word that was used, or like-minded countries. And this has given birth to the Mineral Security Partnership. And the third prize is then to kind of extend your sphere of influence to another group of countries that are perhaps not aligned but neutral, and support some build out of value chains there, because any part of the value chain that gets built out that isn't where it's currently concentrated is actually good for the resilience. So hence that brings me back to my first point today, which is around the geopolitics and why there's so much interest from so many sovereign states. But those are some of the high-level trends that I'm seeing. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Martin, for those insights. Franklin, when it comes to investment risks, such as political instability or infrastructure gaps, what approaches do you see as effective in creating a secure and predictable investment environment?
I think, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I think for us at the AFC, we, especially with critical minerals, I remember when we started looking at this 4 or 5 years ago, and when you map out where all the deposits are, especially in terms of large reserves that can stay very competitive on a global scale, they were not so easy countries. You can't choose where the deposits are. In addition to where their location is from a geopolitical perspective, literally almost all of them had no infrastructure. So you had two macro risks you're already dealing with. For AFC, roughly 45 plus countries in Africa are member countries of the AFC, which makes it easier for us to a certain extent to manage our stakeholders when we're going into projects. Even if you're not a non-member country, or if you don't have a country as part of your institution, I think, for example, with the commercial banks, there are things that you call present countries. So basically they have a banking branch or a license in that country because they can also manage their stakeholders, etc. It's something similar with AFC, even though we don't have the branches, but it's to manage the stakeholders as importantly. But the point we're trying to make here as well is, if you look at all the issues pertaining to critical minerals, sustainability, value addition, geopolitics, the theme keeps repeating itself. And I mean, there's a reason why, because if you observe the bauxite industry and the iron ore industry dominating in West Africa, once the commodity prices collapse, the producers go bankrupt. and then you have to wait for the cycle to restart all over again, and then you come out of care and maintenance. Mm-hmm. The only way to continue to operate on a sustainable basis to deal with those kind of cycles is to also go down midstream and downstream. That way you can smoothen the effect. I think we're in South Africa, manganese, the prices just collapse, so you're still having the same issue. But if you start to beneficiate and add value in the country, on the continent, you'll be able to manage some of those. And that also ties in with the geopolitical risk, because a lot of the balance sheets of the governments are stretched. They need those tax revenues, royalties, the tax revenues, the duties from those mines to continue to sustain the state. The moment you are struggling because of difficult commodity markets, they start to look for who's more financially capable to keep the operations going. And then that's what leads to license conversations. So in order to smoothen that and to continue to manage this on a long-term basis, literally what we've told all our potential clients in the critical mineral space is your projects have to have the midstream and downstream. It's not just, you don't just do a DFS anymore for a concentrate. What is your plan to start to beneficiate 5, 6, 7 years from now? Yes, the technology might be difficult to get because the East has a far a head start, but you have to start thinking about now. I mean, no one does a gold project today to produce concentrates. It's all about getting to the doré before you get to the refinery. So it's the same with critical minerals or any other minerals and metals and mining spaces. For you to operate in a long-term sustainable manner in order to manage all the geopolitics, you have to have a midstream and a downstream approach in your development strategy. With respect to the infrastructure bit, which I talked about, we have to just, it's part of the, it's just take it as part of the project. And there are several financial institutions, including the AFC, that do focus on doing infrastructure tranches to support projects of that nature. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So infrastructure, definitely a big problem. In terms of taxation and the fair value distribution when implementing policies, how will we make sure that's fairly managed between local and international investors?
Oh, that's for me? Okay. Well, the good thing is there are quite a lot of templates, and the ministries are also having a deep thought about this, right? In terms of the ministries that we engage with, when you put together your royalties, your community development fund, your taxes, share the dividends, etc., it's all about, okay, how do you rank against your neighbors? How do you rank against the rest of the continent? And a lot of the engagements with them is, they are actually looking at this. So if you're operating in Ghana, how is Sierra Leone taxing and how the communities are sharing all the benefits of the project? They would also look at what Mali is doing, what Burkina is doing, and what Central Africa is doing. So there's quite a bit of templates there. And it's only fair to get to a fair distribution, because I always when we talk to some of our portfolio companies, we focus a lot on that. And the reason for that is it's Africa, it's geopolitics. If there's any regime change, democratic or not democratic, that's the first place to go look for money, is where contracts look to seem unfair.
Yeah.
Not necessarily everyone was there when you negotiated, yes, we agree, but you have to compare with what the next best person is doing. And that's exactly their mindsets of any new government that will come in, is basically how you're doing that. And at the same time, we've also made it very clear in terms of incorporating local content policies in our investment agreements, in terms of how are you transitioning. We know we don't have the expertise, but once the operations are done, how are you transitioning the senior management roles, etc., to people from the country? That also helps to mitigate any potential concerns.
Thank you. That leads into my next question, which is open for the panel. One of the biggest challenges is balancing local content policies with the interests of international investors. How do you see this balance being struck effectively in African countries? Jude, I don't know if you want to...
I'm happy to discuss this because I've been very present in a number of countries where they are trying to strike that balance. When I lived in South Africa, actually, they were then beginning to think about, this black empowerment imperative and how to make sure that it doesn't, keep investors out, while at the same time also addressing some very real issues that needed to be addressed with regards to local capacity. Same in, another country where I've done quite a bit of work is, throughout West Africa, but Equatorial Guinea in particular. We had a discussion about this morning. Listen, the truth of the matter is it's not that difficult to strike a balance. There is such huge demand, and I don't mean to throw the oil companies under the bus or the mining companies under the bus, but the demand from their standpoint of being in those countries is great. So they have some elasticity in terms of what they're willing to give towards this initiative. Likewise, though, the governments also have a very strong demand for those investments. So they also are quite elastic in regards to making sure that whereas they address the issue over time, they don't in one fell swoop intend to change the dynamics of sort of local capacity in 1 month or 1 year. So I find that there's actually very good accommodation in the countries where I've been active, and local content is its own reward, candidly. There are some countries that have done it phenomenally. Nigeria is one of them. Nigeria may be leading this continent in terms of the importance and strength of local content, but other countries are following behind. And it can't be something that can be abandoned because it's not just, do-gooder type of approach. It also is sustainable. You're only sustainable in the long run if the local community has the capacity to assist, to partner with the investors. So it's something that I stress very much, something that I get involved in as an advisor to governments quite a bit.
Thank you, Mametsa.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this. And I had a conversation earlier, and someone was giving a tough time about Black economic empowerment in South Africa. Firstly, I think that, when it comes to community and employees, and, I was talking to some of the guys at Anglo about this and how that has changed the status quo. I would not be sitting here if it wasn't for some of those rules. I was sponsored by Anglo American, and through that and all the other initiatives, I then was able to actually, do what I've done now. And I think that, we wouldn't have changed the diversity of, countries who owns the minerals, right? But I think that what we shouldn't forget when we're doing all of this, if you look at it, Norway has rules around nationalism, but it hasn't been, it's not criticized. So I wonder why sometimes when African countries do it and it's right for their countries, it is criticized. What I think is important is ensuring that, one, the rules are well understood so that the incoming investors and potential companies that are actually going to work coming into that country understand the rules, can make the decision, right? If I'm looking for cobalt and I need to go to DRC, I'm going to abide. And I'll tell you, when I started Moshe Capital, most of the work we were going to do was going to be in South Africa. And as I was talking to a lot of investors, US investors, UK, I remember at the time people did not want to invest here, but they would invest in Zimbabwe. And I would ask them, with all the new rules that are coming out of Zimbabwe, guess what? The projects that we're looking at in Zimbabwe made sense even with those rules, and they were willing to actually put their money. So I think the local content must be there, and countries must actually be firm on what they want to do. But it must be within reason, that it does not make them globally not competitive, right? Stick to the rules, point number 2. And point number 3, ensure that you actually find the right solutions around funding these things. So if you're going to ask for local content, it does not necessarily mean that you always have to actually give a free ride to the to the investors, well, local investors that you're going to give the shareholding to. No, you can actually find other structures. We have probably 10 structures that we put in place when we help people with their BEE, and it actually has been successful. So it is possible to strike that balance and have a win-win solution.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add?
I can maybe just say from a financial institution point of view, we believe local content is important for many of the African countries and the projects we finance. What we've definitely seen, though, depending on the type of project that happens in the country, the skills development must happen first. So, having a percentage local content is one thing, but in many instances, it becomes a phased-in project for ownership versus skills development, etc. Because like you said, you want to make sure that the project is still successful and that over time, our local Africans can actually take over the roles and the jobs, etc. as well. So there's definitely a space for development of skills, ownership definitely as well. But it becomes, and what we've seen, there's a change. It becomes active ownership, which is very important as well, because that's got its own benefits, within the local content scenario. So, and that's what we also like to see when we finance projects, because then it means there's buy-in from the countries, buy-in from staff, buy-in from whoever is part of that project. And for us, we've seen many success stories. I think in South Africa specifically, our renewable programs is very important. And still, we would like to see the critical minerals becoming that as well, where it's not just ownership percentage-wise, but involvement, development, and I think we all mentioned the whole beneficiation part, even if it's not 100%.
Thank you. Jude?
Can I just quickly add on to what Shirley was saying, and she's exactly right. They go hand in hand. Local content and skills development are inherently part of each other. Even me as a lawyer, putting on my lawyer hat, I'm famous for going into meetings, particularly with sovereigns, and essentially saying, as a part of my pitch, I'm here to make myself redundant. I'm here to do work on your behalf, but I will come in, whether you require it of me or not, to make sure I have a local partner, and over time to make sure that that local partner understands all of the substantive things that I know, so that maybe in the future you reach right around the corner to get your expert lawyer as opposed to reaching to Washington, D.C. And that's really the point in the long run, is to create all of this capacity in all these countries that have the need.
Great, thank you. Okay, on to the next discussion question. Collaboration is essential in the critical minerals sector. How can partnerships between governments, private companies, and international stakeholders contribute to long-term project sustainability? Franklin, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, actually, the part that I wanted to touch on was regional partnerships. I think if I look at the mine development cycle, there's a very strong role, especially South Africa can play for the region. You've got DRA here, you've got VBCOM, I think you have all the technical expertise in South Africa. But because of the lack of financing, I think a special product should be designed. I mean, it's sort of like an ECA type backed facility, but it's not being rolled out as one would expect. We have an intention to build a mine every year at the AFC, whether it's in the precious, bulk, critical mineral space. And a lot of projects in the precious and bulk space is being executed by companies like DRA, etc., out of South Africa. But we're not seeing the financial institutions coming out there. So we need to be very deliberate about that partnership, especially in the greenfield space if we want to solve this particular issue with respect to critical minerals, because I know the technical expertise is still being developed, but there are roles that the big FIs in South Africa can play that will magnificently change the trajectory of the sector in Africa. And for us, that's where we are looking for basically like our own African Mineral Security Partnership from a financing perspective, or sort of Africa Security Minerals Finance Network, from an African perspective of how do we bring the capital and the technical expertise together for African projects. Because, I mean, you've been mining for more than 100 years in South Africa, same in Central Africa, and we don't have a lot of those expertise in the West. So there's quite a lot we can do from a technical and financial partnership perspective that needs to be rolled out as quickly as possible.
Definitely. Thank you. Martin, do you have anything?
Well, maybe just to add, I think, you know, when we're talking about some of these, the value addition and some of the value chains, and some of these products are extremely complex. There's been a lot of talk about EV batteries, or even just, you know, lithium-ion batteries, or behind the grid, or behind sort of the meter or grid stabilization batteries. Now, no country can do that on their own. First of all, no single country in this region has all the minerals. Okay, so if you don't have some kind of collaboration or trade with somebody, you stopped right there. Then I'm very much supportive of every country trying to add as much value within their borders as they can. And I think we should try and support them and even get them a bit further than what they can do right now. So something that's within reach, but is not happening. But every country has its limits. And as a result, there are some countries in the region with higher, you know, sophistication, let's say, or ability to take on complex tasks, and the talent pools sit there, etc. So there needs to be some kind of regional collaboration around, you know, building out these value chains. At the same time, everybody wants to do it on their own, and they feel like if some value addition happens outside their borders, that they're giving something up. So as a panel discussed yesterday, I think we need to find out a fair way so that the region can share in that. Now, the states play one role in this, but we all know that a value chain's really going to be built out by the private sector. They're the ones that are going to make the capital available. They're going to bring the skills and the talent in initially and transfer it. So this has to be much more than just government collaboration and intercoordination. There has to be a mechanism there where you know, we're taking a look at the private sector and being able to mobilize that. Again, just like mining, these value chains, I mean, we're playing in a globally competitive market. You have a choice to build a gigafactory in Texas, or you have a choice to build one here. I think we have to recognize that, and there's only so many of those very, very highly specialized engineers on the planet at the moment. You know, I understood Musk had to import like 80 from South Korea to get his gigafactory going. So these are real constraints. I think we have to keep this all in mind, but we're certainly not going to achieve it without partnerships.
Thank you. Shirley?
I can maybe just add as well. We've said it, and I think this is the second time that it's mentioned, the regional beneficiation hubs that we should do. If I just look at our copper deposits on the continent, and it's all Zambia, DRC, even Botswana, etc., what they have. You know, some countries are a bit ahead of the others, but to have beneficiation happening, you know, to whatever extent in many of these regions, I think, and you've said it nicely, but I think our African countries must get over themselves and make sure that they actually work together, because that's how growth will actually increase within the boundaries of many of those countries. And I think, Franklin, you've mentioned it as well. I think the financial institutions, the local in-country financial institutions, the DFIs, so should actually work together a lot more with some of the more specialized financial institutions. If I look at what we do resources and energy specifically, so it becomes nicely specialized. But we should use our DFIs as well as, you know, our ECAs, as well as our local banks a lot more, because we want to grow Africa, so there's a lot of expertise in many areas sitting within Africa, so we should use that as well. We have everything what it takes. It's just that working together, private-public partnerships. We've seen it nicely happening in South Africa on the renewable side, and we need to build that out as well. And if our critical minerals in the whole of Africa is going to help with the just transition, we can't just ship it out and bring it back again because we need solar panels, for example. So I think that's very important to remember.
I just wanted to add that, on the skills, I feel like we actually need to have a bigger plan for ourselves. When China decided that they want to be the best in high-speed trains, nobody stopped them. So we need to actually figure out what is important for us and have the partnerships with the leaders in those industries. What makes Elon Musk not want to come here, come back home? I mean, challenge right there, and set up a electric vehicles business here. Why not? So I think we need to actually also plan for ourselves and then find the solutions around what we want to achieve. I am with Shirley. Beneficiation, and especially critical minerals, are giving us a platform to actually level the ground for ourselves. So, beneficiation, local beneficiation should be one of the key things that we actually ask for ourselves.
If you have one project only that you're focusing on, or one commodity, we have to make sure that it's a good enough ore body, that the beneficiation, if you're putting up a plant, a smelter, a refiner, whatever next to it, that it actually makes sense? Or is it better that it gets, exported, to wherever it's needed? But for me, the important part is a diverse portfolio. If you have a diverse portfolio, cycles and commodity cyclicality, all of that can be managed within a wider, diverse portfolio. And I know not everyone has the opportunity to do that. But if you can build a diverse portfolio, it is better in the long run, because we know what happens to commodities and cycles. So technology, the mining project, the efficiency of putting up beneficiation, all of that's what we look at as well. And ultimately, financing things like that, we are using, banking 101. We are using your money to finance products so that you can get a return on your deposits, or you being a shareholder. So that becomes for us a very fine balance, what we need to manage as well, because we signed up to be responsible bankers, and we've done that commitment, and hence us looking at projects very critically.
Thank you everyone for attending the panel, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.